Welcome back to stage 2 of the Mirage GT build video series. In this video, we're going to be installing the fuel tank and system. As usual, a full list of the torque settings for this video can be found on our website using the link in the description below. With our steering column now installed on our chassis, we're now ready to install our fuel tank and system. We're going to start by fitting the fuel sender inside the fuel tank, like so. Once in place, we can now secure this in place with the 6 bolts and washers provided. As our choice of fuel filler is already fitted with a breather, we're going to block off this secondary breather, which will not be required as part of our build. Our fuel tank is now ready to be installed on our chassis, but before we do so, we're going to assemble and fit the fuel pump. We start by positioning the fuel pump inside the fuel pump bracket. Next, we take the larger of our 2 fuel hoses and attach it to the end of the fuel pump, which does not have the electrical connections. Next up is our fuel pre-filter. Notice how the pre-filter is marked in and out to correspond with the directional flow of fuel. Be sure to connect the pre-filter end marked out to the long fuel hose before securing it to our bracket using the P-clip. Our shorter fuel hose can now be connected to the pre-filter end marked in, and all of our Jubilee clips can now be tightened to a secure fit. Our fuel pump is now ready to be fitted to the corresponding bracket at the rear of our chassis and secured in place using the 2 bolts provided. With our fuel pump now securely in place on our chassis, we're going to fit our 2 fixed fuel lines to the fuel pump. These consist of one 120mm fuel return line and one 160mm fuel send line. We can now also connect up our fuel pump to the corresponding section of our wiring loom. We're going to connect the wiring loom end marked in black to the negative fuel pump terminal marked in blue, and the wiring loom end marked in green and purple to the positive fuel pump terminal marked in red. Be sure to attach the waterproof connection covers to both ends of the wiring loom before connecting up the fuel pump, as this will provide ample protection to our connections here. With our fuel pump now successfully fitted, we're going to prepare our chassis for the installation of the fuel tank. We're going to add 2 strips of foam insulation to our mounting bar, which will prevent the fuel tank from vibrating once the vehicle is in motion. We're now ready to move the fuel tank into position and secure it in place using the 4 bolts provided. With our fuel tank now in position, we can now connect up the fuel tank to the pre-filter. And finally, the return rail. The next step will be to connect our fuel filler. We start by removing the rubber grommet and sliding our fuel filler in through the chassis and securing it tightly with the Jubilee clip provided, like so. Next up is our breather pipe, which can be connected up to our fuel tank and fuel filler, like so. With all of our rear fuel tank and system components now securely in position, we can now fit our rear blanking plate. With our blanking plate now securely in place, and with no further assembly work required in this particular area of our chassis, we're going to add some silicone sealant around the edges of our fuel tank. Before we move on to fitting our front fuel system components, we're going to connect up our fuel center to the corresponding section of our wiring loom. The final stage of fitting our fuel tank and system is to install our front fuel filter and regulator. These are going to be installed on the front bulkhead of our chassis. We start by marking the position of our 2 brackets before drilling the corresponding holes into our chassis. Our fuel regulator bracket will be held in place using these 3 bolts. Once secure, we can now fit our fuel regulator to its bracket. The type of fuel regulator supplied with each kit will vary depending on the type of throttle bodies selected when ordering. The fuel regulator will be connected up fully at a later stage of our build. The fuel filter bracket is held in place using 2 rivets, like so. Once secure, we can now fit our fuel filter. Be sure to fit the fuel filter with the marked arrows facing upwards, as this corresponds with the directional flow of fuel from our fixed fuel pipes. We can now connect up the bottom end to our fixed fuel pipe below. The remaining connections for these components will be connected up to the throttle bodies in a later video. This concludes the installation of our fuel tank and system. We're now ready to move on to our next video, where we'll be fitting our engine ancillaries and senders.